Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Andy, what were you saying?
Shabbat Shalom.
You're recording it. When someone watches it, do they see us or do they only see you? What do they see?
It depends on what I'm putting on the screen. Right now, they would see all of us.
Okay.
If I do a speaker view, they're only going to see the person who's speaking. And I try to be a TV director and go back and forth between the two. So it's, more interesting.
Well, I was asking is that if my son sees it, he'll see me.
And you can say, hi, son. It's like, hi, Mom.
Hi,
Yeah.
Hi, Michelle.
Okay, so I will ask people to mute themselves unless you are talking. And there comes Doug. We'll wait for him before we do the blessing. Hi, Doug. Hi, Doug. Oh, now he hears. Okay, good. All right, so we're going to begin with the blessing for studying Torah, which I invite everyone to recite to themselves, right? I mean, behind a closed microphone. The joys of being on Zoom. Let's see, here it is. Okay, let me move it over and we will join together. What happened to the version that I had that has, okay, this is annoying. There we go. All right, here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with the words of Torah. Okay, so we're going to begin with an introduction to the book of Joshua, and we're going to go to the study sheet that I sent out that I will share with you in a moment. We have completed the Torah. We are now in the section of the Bible called Nevi'im, which means prophets. In our Bible, this is what comes right after Torah. In the Christian Bible, actually, the book of Joshua is what comes next, but this is the historical prophets. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, those books are what is known as the historical prophets. So we are going through the history of Israel here. And as I said, that's what follows in the Christian Bible. But then the prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, etc., they come at the end of what they call the Old Testament, because for them, the prophets are announcing the coming of Jesus. So what's interesting about this historical section is that it is known as the Deuteronomic history. So it is following on the book of Deuteronomy, and it follows the theology of the book of Deuteronomy. Now, would anybody like to try to tell us what that theology is? What's the theology of the book of Deuteronomy, which, by the way, is part of the Shema, has a couple of paragraphs in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, Jane, you're muted.
There we go. The theology, I look at the book of Deuteronomy as a recap of everything Moses wants to leave with his people.
That's true.
And I see it more as a series of do's and don'ts than a theology.
Okay.
But if I had to push for theology, I think it would be you have one God, and this God is going to lead you through Joshua into the promised land, and that this God will never desert you.
That's great. That's a great beginning of the theology. You're right. Theology is not really a Jewish enterprise.
It isn't.
Right. So let's say, okay, you're absolutely right. It is, it's basically the book of Deuteronomy is basically the constitution for the new country, the new people. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a review by Moses, absolutely. So God says, here are my laws, right?
Right.
What are the consequences of these laws? Somebody want to try to, go ahead, Lynn.
Basically, if you follow the commandments, all will be well. And if you don't, all will not be very well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that is what I would say is theology. Theology loosely defined. In other words, this is the relationship between God and God's people. I will be with you, but you better obey these commandments. Otherwise, you're going to be in deep trouble, right? As I mentioned last night, for those who were at the service, one of the things that's really important to the land of Israel is rain, right? Unlike Egypt, where there's the Nile that spills over and allows the land to be irrigated, or in Mesopotamia, which has 2 rivers, Israel really depends on rain, which probably is a reason that the Israelites think of God as up above, right? Because God is responsible for the rain. And so if you're not good and it doesn't rain, you're going to starve. So when I say that the whole historical books that follow Deuteronomy are based on Deuteronomic theology, it means that as we go through the history, when the Israelites, misbehave, go after other gods, don't follow the God of Israel and the commandments of the God of Israel, they get punished. Other empires will overrun them, leading, of course, ultimately to the destruction of the temple, right? And to the exile of the 10 northern tribes. So that's kind of the theology behind these various books. So I want to now share my screen with you, and we're going to look at some general statements about the book of Joshua. As I mentioned, there's a lot less written about the book of Joshua than about the Torah as far as Jewish commentators are concerned. Even Christian commentators, because frankly, well, we'll see what you think about the book. We're going to skip a few sections because the book is divided pretty much into a couple of sections, and one of them is really the land distribution. Once they get into the land is distributed, and frankly, I don't want to be blasphemous, but reading about how this tribe got this and that tribe got that with the geographical boundaries is not the most scintillating reading. Okay, so let me share the handout. All right, I made it bigger, so hopefully it's visible to everybody. Okay, would somebody like to read a little bit of this?
I can read, Rabbi.
Okay, yeah, please.
Okay. The book of Joshua is the first book in Nevi'im, prophets, the second section of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible.
Let me just stop you for 1 second for those who don't know what Tanakh means. Tanakh is an acronym for the Hebrew Bible. The T is for Torah. The N is for Nevi'im, prophets. And the Ch is for Ketuvim, which is writings, okay? And the vowels are in there just so you can pronounce this acronym. Okay, thank you. That's what the Hebrew Bible is referred to as the Tanakh.
It is considered part of the Deuteronomic history that begins in Deuteronomy and the Torah and ends with the second book of Kings and Prophets. These books tell the story of the Israelites from the wandering in the desert to the establishment of a monarchy in the land of Israel. James King West writes, no less than the books of Torah, the former prophets offer a theological approach to history. Their concern is not to report the bare facts of national and international happenings, but to penetrate the meanings of the events and expose their religious significance. It is precisely at this level that the unity inherent in these books is most apparent. Utilizing a variety of older sources and historians of the Deuteronomic school, combined with the traditions pertaining to several historical eras, conquest and fictony, united and divided monarchies, into a framework consistent with the philosophy set forth in the book of Deuteronomy. Regardless of the unique patterns which characterize the separate books, the basic theological perspective remains unchanged. Israel's fortunes rise or fall, depending upon her faithfulness to the covenant with Yahweh. A comparison with Deuteronomy is enough to convince the reader that in style and vocabulary, as well as viewpoint, these books are closely related.
Jane, your cat is
Anyone?
very unhappy. I think they
No,
want-
no, he's just a talker. Yeah.
Oh,
and
okay.
he is
Can we
unhappy.
define
I'm
amphiktony?
not petting him.
Yeah, Jane, you're the only one who could actually read that word amphiktony and actually know what it means.
I don't know what it means.
Okay,
I did read it, I think, correctly. I
you
know enough
did.
Latin and stuff to do that, but I really have no idea what it means.
Okay,
Is this the judges part?
I believe it
the
says
big-
it's in
Everything
ancient
that comes
Greece.
before Saul?
Yes. In ancient Greece, the association of neighboring states formed around a religious center.
Mm.
That's what that means.
Oh,
Okay, so it is the period
Oh,
of the
okay.
judges, absolutely. Okay, what are you seeing on screen? Are you seeing my email?
No, the same handout that Jane.
Okay, good.
that's the
Okay,
handout.
good. Okay, so yeah, the book of Joshua is the conquest. The Amphiktony is the book of Judges, which is a sort of loose confederation of tribes. And then you have the United Monarchies, the United Monarchy, which is the book of Samuel, the two books of Samuel, and the beginning of the book of Kings, and then you have the divided monarchies.
Yeah, that's my.
So it's just a fancy word for loose confederation. So basically, this is what I was saying before, that there is a, consistent unifying idea behind these books, which is you better listen to God, right? Otherwise, you're in trouble. Are there other questions other than the definition of amphiktony? Now a fancy word that you can use at cocktail parties.
Yeah.
All right, so does somebody else want to read the next piece? Doug? Doug?
One moment. Hold on just one moment. Here I am. All right. Here we go. Okay. John H. Walton writes, there are two popular misconceptions about the book of Joshua. One is that it is just the story of a courageous and godly person. The other is it is a military record of the conquest. Both must be passed over in identifying the reason why the book was written. Regarding the first, the lack of biographical details and dearth of expressions of approval or disapproval of Joshua's actions suggests that Joshua is not really the focus of the material, though he certainly plays a central role in the events in the book. As the second, a close examination reveals that there is actually very little given of the details of military strategy and achievement, only the barest sketch of an outline.
So as I think I've mentioned before, and we'll definitely see this again as we get to the book of Judges. This is sort of an so-called, I'm going to put it in quotes, idealized version of the conquest of the land. Okay, we're going to see how within 3 lightning military strikes, they're going to take over the land. However, when we get to the book of Judges, which comes next, we will see that a number of places that were supposedly conquered and a number of kings who were supposedly killed are still all around. So it is not terribly historical, and it is not terribly focused on Joshua. Joshua is certainly, I'm sure most of you, you've heard the name Joshua, but it's not a name that you consider to be one of the important names in our history, right? Like King David or Moses or Abraham, right? He's sort of a secondary figure. Okay, Doug, you want to read the next one as well?
Yeah. J. Albertus Saugen writes, what is the aim of Deuteronomy? The most adequate answer has recently been given by a parrot in these terms. The authors of the Deuteronomistic history work were not moved by a passion for writing history, but by the need to give a theological explanation of the fall of 2 kingdoms. Beginning from the Babylonian exile, the school thus sought to give the people of Israel a series of retrospective historical reasons, beginning from the conquest of Palestine and going down to the exile, to explain how the political destruction of the people was the result not of the weakness, but of the power of Yahweh. He had warned the people for many centuries through the prophets, exhorting them to conversion. Failure to respond to this appeal had brought divine judgment upon the people, and oracles announcing judgment through the prophets were strictly fulfilled. The north had fallen between 722 and 720. The south suffered two exiles, one in 597 and the other, which was definitive, in 587. In other words, Deuteronomy recalls the prophetic preaching, if only implicitly through, though we also note it is a tendency to give a legalistic aspect to what the prophets had presented as a possibility.
Okay, as you notice, these are all Christian commentators. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment, just to reinforce this. So, of course, all of this was written after Israel was in exile, right? And had been kicked out of the land. So it is definitely retrospective. In fact, the Torah itself begins with exile, right? Adam and Eve are exiled from the Garden of Eden. So, I mean, to me, that's one of many, many proofs that, this was written looking back at what happened and trying to explain it. So, we're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And so at the end of our history, we're kicked out of the land of Israel. And, I think I've mentioned in Torah study that we don't go from polytheism to monotheism. We don't go from a belief in many gods to a belief in one God in one fell swoop. According to scholars, there's this intermediary stage called monolatry, where there is a recognition that there are other gods, but that our God is the strongest and the biggest and the best. So if Israel gets kicked out of the land and exiled, what does that say about our God Yahweh, or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? Yahweh is is a scholarly term for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the unpronounceable name of God. How do we explain, if we have such a great God, that in a sense God was defeated? That's how it would have been understood by the ancient people. So it has nothing to do with God being weak. It has to do with our being weak, our not having followed what we were supposed to follow. Yes, Stacy.
Well, it's the punishment theology. It's that if you don't do what I say, or explanatory, because it's the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Through the ages, everybody wants to know why we're hit with pestilence and plague, and it's because we've been bad, clearly.
Yes, exactly. And it's not why do bad things happen. Hang one second, I'll get right to you. It's not why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to bad people? Right? We were bad. Yes, Sandy, go ahead.
I'm just curious. Have any of the Christian past preachers blamed COVID on homosexuality and all those things that?
Oh, I'm sure they have, right? I mean, Katrina was blamed, it was in New Orleans. Oh, look at that lifestyle in New Orleans, of course, right? There's always a way you can do that.
Right.
And why? Because, yeah, go ahead, Teresa.
But I'm just asking
whether they've done it here. I'm sure they have. I don't know. Yes, Stacy says yes.
Pat Robertson never misses an opportunity.
Okay.
Teresa.
Would Christian theologists be more likely to focus on punishment than a Jewish commentator?
I don't think so.
They were always blaming everything on the Jews.
What's that?
They were always blaming everything on the Jews, like that they were stubborn and rejecting Christ and stuff.
Hey, God says that the Jewish people are stubborn with a stiff neck and they won't listen to God.
Okay, so you don't think there's a difference between the Christian and the Jewish commentators?
Not in the biblical and rabbinic tradition. Obviously later, yes. But this is the biblical theology, Now, to be fair, and this book, our Bible is also the Bible of Christians, which they call the Old Testament. There's also, for example, the book of Job. The book of Job says, something horrible can happen to you, and it can have nothing to do with your behavior, your beliefs, or anything like that. Okay. And there's some other books in there that do contradict Deuteronomy. So I think the rabbis who put together, who canonized this material, had enough sense about what the world was really like to say, hey, guess what? This is not always how it works. But it's convenient for a couple of things. One is that you can kind of rule people this way. You listen to our laws, right, Stacy? Yes, you listen to our laws and everything will be okay. Otherwise, guess what? You're going to be punished. And it's also a way for people to explain to themselves why things happen, right? We don't like to have things happen that we can't explain. And it gives us a sense of control. If only I'm a good person, nothing bad will happen to me. Well, of course, we know that's not true. But people believe things that aren't true all the time.
What
right?
about the Holocaust? Was that a punishment?
Well, according to the Satmar rabbi, it
Mhm.
was, because we were assimilated.
Mhm.
Now, I don't buy that at all. Go ahead, Jane.
Isn't there's length to the punishment. Let me put it that way. Because God doesn't say, I'll just punish you. I'm going to punish you and your successors for 10 generations. So when you act badly, you have to think of what is going to happen in the coming generations, or if something bad happens to you, as you were mentioning in Job, it may have nothing to do with Job, but it may have something to do with something that, his great, great, great grandfather did, and boom, here comes the punishment.
That's a very good point. And the little video that I showed yesterday, which is based on a Talmud story about Honi the circle maker. He asked somebody, why are you planting a carob tree? It's not going to bear fruit, while you live. It's going to be in 70 years. And the person who plants it says, I'm doing it for my grandchildren. So thinking ahead is always very important. Yeah, go ahead, Stacy.
In Hamilton, in George Washington's, or when Hamilton's talking about you will plant seeds in a garden that you will never see, the founding fathers thought the same thing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they were inspired by the Bible, because they were, I think, pretty infused with the Bible. Anybody else? Okay, so we're going to continue reading, but I think, it's important to put the book of Joshua in this context to see where it fits into the history and to the theology. So let's go on to the next. Let's see. Okay, who would like to read Samuel Sandmel?
Where are we?
It's right up on the screen.
Oh, Samuel?
Yeah.
Samuel Sandel writes, the
feeling?
It's not centered, and
It's not centered?
well, on my screen, I must have done something.
You want me to push it to the right or is this better?
To the
other way?
left of me.
Is this better?
No, your picture is covering part of it. And you know me, and
She has the slide on the view over too far. She doesn't know how to slide it.
Okay, I don't know which way to go, but I'm sorry. Maybe somebody else.
whoops, I lost it.
All right. Okay, Sandy, go ahead and we'll come back to you, Susie.
Yeah.
Samuel Sandmel writes, the feeling of the book of Joshua towards the Canaanites is neither generous nor by any respectable standards admirable. It calls to mind the attitudes of the American colonists, especially of those who pressed westward towards the Indians. The sentiment there is no good engine, but a dead engine, was deeply ingrained in our American mentality. A recognition of this blemish in ourselves may possibly give us some perspective towards evaluating the equally bloodthirsty and equally deplorable attitude attributed to the immigrant Israelite tribes. The attitude cannot be condoned, but the intent of the, just a minute. But the intent of the biblical authors needs to be understood. They were relating what they believed to be the history of God's people doing God's will. The Canaanites, in their view, have never had never done anything but oppose God's will. It was the Canaanites' misdeeds that brought about their downfall. For Yahweh was punishing them, and Israel was
Yahweh is, or Yah.
Oh,
it's a different
Yahweh
way of
was
pronouncing it.
Yahweh's agent. To Yahweh, the Canaanites had become justly hateful, and hence Israel must also hate them.
You know, it's interesting. Yesterday, I got a call from somebody who is involved with Jewish World Watch. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization, but they were founded about 17 years ago to bring attention to the genocide in Darfur. And they've continued to be vigilant about various genocides around the world. And so she's not a rabbi. She was saying to me, you know, and so I draw from our tradition about how, you know, we oppose genocide and blah, blah, blah. And I go, how do you explain some of the material in our Bible that actually condones genocide? Like the book of Joshua. And, oh, well, I usually draw from the Talmud. Well, okay, great. But, you know, we have to face up to the reality that we do have material in our own Bible that does condone genocide. And we'll see that in here. You know, it's also in the book of Deuteronomy. You know, all the different Canaanite peoples are to be destroyed. And everything, you know, that they possess, you know, in their religious materials. So let me ask you how you would how would you deal with that if you were a member of Jewish World Watch and you were going around trying to get people to you know, come on board, and they said to you, well, wait a minute, doesn't Judaism condone genocide in some way? Like, I'm looking at this book here. How would you respond to that? And I'll tell you that I was a long time ago, part of a Los Angeles commission where we were having Christian, Muslim, and Jewish clergy together discussing issues between us, including problematic texts. Go ahead, Lynn.
I think you say frequently that we are not a biblical religion, but a rabbinic religion.
Thank you, Lynn. That's one
How the
definite
rabbis
important example.
interpret it. Yeah.
I will say, just as a parenthesis, but I would like to emphasize what you said, which is, yes, we are not a biblical religion, we're a rabbinic religion. But I would like to mention, unfortunately, that there are some very orthodox right-wing rabbis in Israel who kind of look at the Palestinians as Canaanites, not necessarily to kill them, but to at least get them out of the land. So, but that is, I would say, a very tiny minority. So one thing is to say, well, we're not a biblical religion, we're a rabbinic religion. But so what else could we do? I gave her my strategies for dealing with it in case it ever comes up. Okay, anybody? Yes, please, Jenny.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is what you were referring to, biblical versus rabbinic, but sort of a non-literal approach. So I'm not sure if I'm saying the same thing, but it could be anger is meant to be metaphorical, not literal. And so there's still, you know, one doesn't have to disregard what the text is saying, but can interpret it differently.
Absolutely. That's definitely one of the strategies, to not take it literally, to look at it as you said, it could be about anger, or it could be about, you know, the Canaanites are considered idolaters. So what is the idolatry within us that we need to destroy? Because frankly, you know, I don't think this book would be so powerful and have had such lasting power if it didn't have something to tell us in every age. And one of the things we do is look at it from a spiritual level. You know, we have our own idolatry within us. We have our own idols that we need to get rid of in our society and in ourselves. So absolutely, that's one very important strategy. Yes, Stacey.
You know, it occurs to me that we always are confronted with really ugly pieces of our past. I think it's a lot like reconciliation efforts in South Africa, that if you don't look your historical past in the face, and address genocide for what it is. I mean, I think that we had to turn around and look at the genocide that occurred, you know, in World War II, and nobody wants to ignore it or whitewash it. And so I think that I agree that there's a lot of, we can certainly manipulate it in a way that it becomes metaphorical, but on a purely factual level and dealing with it in the future, the way I would deal with it if I'm dealing with someone who wants to ask about it is I would say that we all, everyone has an ugly past, and that our character really is in addressing it in a honest, open, transparent, and reconciliatory fashion.
Excellent, excellent. So
I think that there's so many different cultures and societies that have had to really wrestle with this as well. I mean, this just reminds me so much of, you know, part of my tradition and heritage is also Native American, which was both Choctaw and Cherokee, both of whom were slaveholders. And it's been a process that they have had to go through, from a tribal component to my relatives who are still on reservations and discuss this, as having to have this reconciliation and a recognition of what their role was, not just as slaveholders, as Native American nations early on, but also their open and willingness to work with the Confederacy during that particular time in history, only to find the remnants of what would be left after Reconstruction to be the destruction of the Native American nations and movement towards Indian territory. And that's a very interesting one, but there are so many parallels with our own Jewish history and so many others, especially as mentioned previously, South Africa, Zimbabwe, other places around the world. This is an ongoing dialogue. And that's why when I find, you know, for example, Joshua to be something that speaks to the times, I think it's because even though we don't want history to repeat itself, unfortunately, from generation to generation, we do find indeed these same strands running through. So
thank you. Those are all very, very beautifully stated. So yeah, what I said to this woman was, first of all, you problematize the text, as you said. You say, this is a problem. Don't try to hide from it or make like it's not there. It is there. Then the second thing that I do is historicize it. So not to say that this doesn't still exist today, because it does. But you know, we know that this was written by human beings, maybe divinely inspired, we don't know. But certainly their perspective on how to come into a land is different from the one that we have. Not to say that it doesn't exist in many modern people, but you know, this group does not look at it that way. And then the third thing is to not take it literally. So I think you've all, you know, come up with beautiful strategies, and you're ready to go and speak for Jewish World Watch. Okay, any other comments before we go to the next? Yes, please, Dan.
Definitely not a biblical scholar by any means.
Don't need to be.
What you just said really completely parallels my own thinking. I think that there's a basic divide between thinking that the Bible is literally the writing of God versus this is the writing of people who lived many, many years ago and had a very different outlook from the way we think about things now in certain respects. There is within the Bible definitely a moral imperative to be a good person. So that's very central to everything. And it's stated in terms of following God's commandment, which is also fine. So as long as that's as far as we go, I'm 100% in.
Great, thank you, thank you. No, you do not need to be a biblical scholar to be in this group. You need to be someone who's willing to look at the text and think about it. That's all you need to do. Okay, any more comments before we go on? We haven't even, of course, started even reading the book, but we got another couple of comments and then we'll start reading. So we're going to read, yeah, this is the last comment, J.G. Williams. Susie, are you able to read this, or is it still not in the right place on the screen? You're muted. You need to unmute, Susie. Yeah, you are muted. Still muted. I'm
Push
sorry,
your-
my dear. You need
Push
to
your
click the
space bar
microphone.
down.
Oh, space bar. That's right. That's a good way to do it. Can you click on your space bar?
Just hold it down.
There you go. Now you've just muted yourself again.
You have to hold it down.
And then let go. And that's it.
No, don't let go.
Oh, just keep it down. You have to keep it down. There you go. Okay. Don't let go.
J.J. Williams writes, there are many who are angered or upset by the Yahweh of Joshua. Turns out to be a rather bloodthirsty and highly biased God. Who could worship a God like this? Surely such questioning is justified if the book is read on a purely historical plane. The story, however, is not just history, but it is retelling of a myth, and as such functions in much the same capacity as those many movies in which the good cowboys get the bad Indians. In the world we live in, things don't happen quite that way, for there is too much evil in the best of us and too much good in the worst of us to make any human battle a war between good and evil. Still, we watch the Late Late Show, not because we believe the story is factually accurate, but because we believe, very deeply believe, that this is the way things ought to be. Not now, but perhaps on the last day, the honest cowboy will root the varmint out.
Okay. I cannot think of a more politically incorrect statement. It was obviously written quite a long time ago. Get those bad Indians. No, but I think we get the point that it's about the myth of rooting out bad. So Canaanites represent bad idolaters, and people go against what our God tells us. But
Yeah.
I can't believe this. Well, but that's what those Westerns were about, right? I mean, we were rooting for the cowboys in those olden days.
Right.
If there's anybody younger, no, there's nobody in this group, maybe Vicky, who were young enough to say, huh? I would never have rooted for the Cowboys, but yeah, anyway. But you get the general gist. From Bob Dylan, oh, the history books tell, well, I have to click on this. This is what Jason has. From Bob Dylan, oh, the history books tell it, they tell it so well. The cavalry's charged, the Indians fell, the cavalry's charged, the Indians died. Oh, the country was young with God on its side. Right, that's how we looked at it. Mm-hmm. And that's how this politically incorrect commentator.
Yeah.
And also, it goes with that whole idea of American exceptionalism.
Yes.
From the beginning, from the time the Puritans came over, God has always been with the Americans.
That's right.
That's part of the exceptionalist statement. They'll tell you that straight out.
Right. And the Israelites felt the same way. Jason.
I would point out that quite a few people this week thought God was on their side in the actions they took.
Right.
And once you've established a good and evil, that there must be a diametrically opposed side to you and the other side is evil, it's really easy to perform acts that you otherwise wouldn't have because you're doing it in the name of God and good. And therefore, everything you do is justified. And once you've established that framework where it's such a strong dichotomy, you really become less human, honestly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just thinking we have two historians in this group. One is Jane and the other one is Carl. Interested at some point to hear, Carl, your perspective on all of this, because this is theoretically historical, so-called historical material. You don't have to say something now, but if you have something, I'd love to hear it.
I can't think of anything offhand, but I think most cultures and nations have a mythology that they embrace. When I was a youngster going to school in Canada, we learned that Canada, which was not then a political jurisdiction, it was a colony, Canada had won the War of 1812. And then when I moved to the States, I learned that no, the United States won the War of 1812. And when I went to college, I learned that no one won it. It was a perception that both sides had, but it was actually a negotiated settlement.
That's very
Oh.
funny. That's very funny. Actually, I went to a French school. I mean, it was, all the classes were in French for 12 years, everything, geometry, chemistry, history, all in French. And we would study science, and guess what? Before anybody else got to some discovery, there was a Frenchman there first. Did you know that? The French discovered everything first. And when we got to the history, we somehow went through we'd go through like from the Gaul period all the way up to World War II, and then we'd start all over again. We never got to World War II until I was in 12th grade. And then we skipped over it mighty fast. So everybody has their own, as you said, Carl, their own mythology about their own people and country. All right, so now let's take a look at the final thing I have on this handout, which is some similarities between the book of Joshua and the story of Moses. Somebody like to read this?
I
Ruth,
will.
you want to? Who?
Sherry.
Sherry, go ahead.
The book of Joshua contains many similarities to the story of Moses. Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. Joshua leads them into Canaan. Moses leads Israelites miraculously across the Red Sea. Joshua leads them miraculously across the Jordan River. Moses sends out spies into Canaan. Joshua sends out 2 spies to Jericho. Moses allocates land on the east side of the Jordan. Joshua allocates land on the west side of the Jordan. And finally, Moses gives a prolonged address before dying, as does Joshua. This farewell address at the end of the book brings the parallelism between the 2 leaders full circle.
Great, you can keep reading.
Joshua died when he was 110 years old. Only one other patriarchal figure lived exactly to 110, Joseph. And the book of Joshua connects these 2 leaders in the final lines of the book. After Joshua has already passed away, we find this: the bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem. Joseph was responsible for bringing the Israelites down to Egypt, but Joshua has led the people back to the land of Canaan, officially ending the exile and opening a new chapter in Israelite history in which the people inherit their homeland.
By the way, Shechem, do you remember what happened at Shechem? Anybody remember that story?
No.
Teresa,
Isn't that the Dinah story?
Dinah story, yeah. Remember Dinah was raped by the prince of Shechem, and then the brothers say, if you circumcise yourselves, he can marry her. And then instead of that, right after they've been circumcised and are obviously in pain, they all get murdered. Shechem is today's Ramallah, just FYI.
Oh.
Okay, so there are parallels. We'll see what the differences are. So we're going to start reading from the book. And chapter 1 is really a transition between the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Joshua. That's not it. Stop. Wait a minute. Where's the... Okay, wait a second. Sorry, folks. Got to find it. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. Sorry. This is so annoying. Here it is. Okay. No, it isn't. Why does it keep doing this? Here it is. 3 times the charm. All right. So this is a very, very beginning. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. No, then I get that thing on the side, which I do not like. All right. Who would like to start reading? We're just going to read the first 9 verses. Stacy, you want to read it?
Sure. Joshua installed as leader. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Do you want me to read the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go.
Thank you very much. Let me just try to do one thing here. Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. So I'm going to leave this up so you can refer to it. So these first 9 verses are a speech by God addressed to the new leader, and it introduces us to the 2 major themes of the book: the occupation of the land west of the Jordan and the distribution of the land among the tribes. And there is a contrast that's set up between Moses and Joshua. What's the contrast that you see here in the very beginning?
Joshua's alive and Moses is dead.
Well, that's one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Okay. Yes, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
What else? What does it
There
say
are
about
similarities
Moses?
between the two, between, what one did and then what later another did.
Whoops.
What is this thing doing here? Okay. See what it says about Moses?
He's
servant of
referring to, it's referring to Moses as the servant of God, whereas Joshua is the successor of Moses, but he's not identified that way.
Right. So in Hebrew, Moses is the Eved of God. And Eved means 2 things. It means servant, but it also means slave. And when we left Egypt, we were the Eved, the slave of Pharaoh. We became the Eved of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. We went from being a slave to Pharaoh to being a servant of God. And the word that's used for Joshua is misharet. So it's sort of an official, an aid, very different, very not as, as significant as being the servant of God. So we're already establishing this difference between these 2 guys, even though we looked at what some of the parallels were, but there are also obviously important differences. So Joshua is given, oh, by the way, the Talmud says that Moses is the sun and Joshua is the moon. And as you know, the moon received the light of the sun, so it doesn't have its own, light source. Again, a very important difference between the 2. So there are 3 tasks that are given to Joshua. What are the 3 tasks?
To go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready.
Okay, and for what purpose?
Cross
3
the
days from now,
Jordan.
you'll cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is given.
Okay, so one
You
thing is
better-
that you're going to go conquer the land. You're in charge of getting the land conquered, right? Okay, what else?
You have to obey all the laws.
Obey all the laws. Okay, that's very important. And also, what else?
Be strong and courageous.
Said that like 3 times.
Yes, and by the way, you may remember that Moses said the very same thing to Joshua before he died. Chazak ve'ametz. Be strong and courageous. And by the way, this is a very big territory.
Robert Alter says that it's too large, not
Right.
only for ancient Israel, but for modern Israel to
Right.
militarily contain it.
Yeah, it's a very large bit of land that never really was, I don't think, Israel, but it's nice to pretend that it was. There's also the distribution of the land that's very important.
Mhm. But don't you think that there's an inherent disappointment because given these land boundaries, that you're supposed to occupy this territory, you can't, you never will. Isn't there a lie underlying this promise of a promised land?
Well, unfortunately, there are people today who say, that the West Bank of the Jordan is Judea and Samaria, and therefore we're entitled to it. God promised us all this land. I mean, it gives us, unfortunately, gives some people the justification for saying that we should take over. There's really no reason to allow the Palestinians to have a state, because that's our land. Look what God promised us.
And wasn't the Hittite territory Syria and Assyria?
Oy,
To
I'm
the
not that
north,
great with
wasn't
geography. Is there a map?
I'll look
That
it up.
crossed over
We
several
put that.
territories. The Hittite territories that actually went over like 3 or 4 different nations at that time. So that was a huge area.
Right, they were very strong.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a map, but it doesn't show who has what territory.
Let me look at that.
Look at that. I'm not great with what land was what when, but the point is it's way beyond what we ever really had.
So, Rabbi, there's one
Turkey.
thing that stood out to me. There's this one little rhetorical sentence where he says, have I not commanded you? I think it said.
I'm gonna go
And
back to it.
and everything else is declarative: be strong and courageous, et cetera, et cetera. And then
Have I not commanded? Let me look at the Hebrew before we assume anything. And I don't have the Hebrew up on the screen, but I have it over here. Let's see, number 9.
It just stood out to me because everything else is a declarative, an imperative. Go do. And then
it is.
Odd rhetorical question in the middle of it.
Let's see. Rock Hazak. Okay, let's keep this. Oh, have I not? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, I think the Hebrew is kind of a question. Yeah. Yeah, it's a rhetorical question.
Was just, we always say that the commentators, every little thing that's a little different. That was just something that jumped out to me.
Let me see. It
Maybe it doesn't mean
actually,
anything else.
it's interesting. I have a Stone edition. This is the Orthodox kind of commentary on, as I said, there's not a lot of stuff on this, but anyway, this is the Jewish commentary, and there's absolutely nothing on that verse. How's that? Yeah, there's nothing. So I don't know what to say, except that clearly what God is saying is, look, there's danger out there when you go into this land, but I'm going to be with you. So don't worry about it, right? God is promising to be there. And as long as you obey me, I will be there to take care of you. Right away, we get that Deuteronomic theology. Okay, let me see. Oh, and the thing about crossing the Jordan, apparently the Jordan was, I've seen the Jordan River, and so I don't know what part of the Jordan River they're talking about, but apparently there was a big gorge, and crossing it over was not a simple task of just swimming across or, going across a bridge or something like that. It was pretty dangerous. Does anybody else know anything about the Jordan River beyond that? Okay, I read in one of the Christian commentaries that it was actually not such an easy thing. Anybody? No. Okay. And let me go back to the text so we can look at it together. So verse 8. So keep this book of the law always on your lips. Do not ever, ever forget it. Then you will be prosperous, right? Totally let's make it green. Every time I try to do it, it does this weird thing. Okay. So this is the Deuteronomic statement, right?
Mhm.
Everything's going to be just fine. All you have to do is follow my law, right?
Mhm.
And the other thing is meditate on it day and night. So this is not something that you just sort of know about vaguely. You need to actively study this, just like you guys are doing today, right? So that you know what the law is and you will not, forget. You have to set aside time to study it. And all of Israel has to participate in this, is what we're going to see. So let's go to the next section, which is starting at verse 10. Who would like to read that?
I can read.
Okay, Jason.
So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous.
Great, thank you. So what's the deal with the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh? Why is he specifically addressing them? Anybody remember? And I mean, it says it in the text, but yes, Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, when they first got there, they asked if they could stay there on the east side because they had a lot of cattle and it was going well. And God said, okay, as long as you're willing to fight with the rest of them later.
Uh-oh.
No?
Teresa, we just stopped hearing you. Uh-oh.
I'm sorry, did you not hear anything?
I heard the beginning.
Okay, well, so basically they like living on the east side and wanted to stay there.
Exactly.
And Moses said, okay, but you have to be willing to fight later. And they said, yes.
Exactly. So they didn't want to go all the way across. They wanted to stay on the east side of the Jordan. But Joshua was saying, hey, guess what? You can go back to that place and live there, but you need to participate in this conquest. Everybody has to participate in this. All of Israel has to do this. Israel must remain one body dedicated to this one land. And rest, peace, and security are only going to exist once you are in the land that was given by God. Peace and security rests on the loyalty to the occupant of the Mosaic office, which happens to be Joshua. So if you obey Joshua and you do everything you're supposed to do, everything's going to be cool. So this first chapter centers on the identity of the people of God and its relationship to its human leader.
Mhm.
The people of God must have strong leadership from men loyal to Moses and must face the task that's given by God with strong conviction and courage. And such leadership can find its authority only in the presence of God. So that's what the first chapter is telling us. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we, yes, Jane.
I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention, I have Robert Alter's edition of Joshua, and he has some very interesting footnotes. But he says in all that we heeded Moses, so we will heed you. I mean, right now, the people of Israel are pledging their loyalty to Joshua. You command us, we'll do what you say. And he just wants us to remember how rebellious Israel was against Moses. So
Good point.
There's a certain irony in this oath of loyalty, I think. Does that mean they're going to be just as rebellious towards Joshua as they were towards Moses? I haven't read the story, so I really don't know, but the implication is there.
Absolutely. Well, once Moses was on Mount Sinai and comes down and says, this is what God's commanded, they all say, we will do as you have commanded us, right? And now they're saying the
Right.
same thing to Joshua.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. They eventually get kicked out of the land. So I guess, I mean, they may not be rebelling against Joshua per se, which they don't, but eventually. And Joshua is merely the human leader who is telling them to follow God. So the being against whom they are rebelling is God more than Moses or Joshua. Okay, so let's go on to the next chapter. And let's see, Joshua 2. Here we go. I mean, these titles, Rahab and the spies and all that, that's put in by the Christians, and as are the chapter and verse numbers. But this is an interesting story. So who would like to read about Rahab the prostitute?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and enter your house because they've come to spy out the whole land. But the women who had taken the 2 men and hidden them, She said, yes, the men came to me, but I didn't know where they'd come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You might catch up with them. But she had taken them to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside of your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear. Agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now the first thing is that Joshua is sending out spies. Who else sent out spies?
Moses.
Yeah, Moses had sent out spies as well. Now, the spies in the case of Moses went there to kind of see whether it was really likely that they were going to be able to win, even though God had assured them that God would be with them and there was not a problem. And they came back, and of course, they got everybody all nervous. And in the end, that generation was not allowed to enter the land. And the only two people who came back and said everything's cool were
Joshua and Caleb.
exactly Joshua and Caleb. So that's why Joshua was able to go into the land. Now, according to the commentary that I read, these two spies, first of all, they're sent secretly, right? So it's not like, because Moses had sent the tribal leaders, the 12 tribal leaders to go. So it's a very public thing. And here it's a secret. And theoretically, they're being sent not so much to see if the land is able to be conquered, but more to come back and to boost the morale of everybody who is going to go in and be part of this army. Now, Jericho, which is the first city they're going to surround and take over, is apparently the earliest fortified town, settled around 8,000 BCE, and fortified by 7,000 BCE. Now, interestingly, do you see any parallels here between Rahab and somebody else who's not a Jewish or an Israelite figure, about how she's heard about all the things that God has done? Who else says, I heard about what your God has done for you?
Yael?
Well, Yael is definitely she's definitely an ally of the Israelites, and she helps them win a victory. But this language is very parallel to somebody else who's not an Israelite. I heard everything that your God has done for you, how he split the sea, blah, blah, blah. Jethro. Remember Jethro? Yitro, who is Moses' father-in-law. Remember, he sees Moses doing all this judging all by himself, and he's exhausted and burnt out. And he says, I know that your God is this amazing God. And so Rahab says the same thing. Oh, I've heard about your God. Ugh. And just like some people in our government who say, what side do I think I want to put myself on? Well, there's this really powerful God who split the Sea of Reeds, who allowed these people to escape Egypt. Do I want to be on that side, or do I want to be on the side of this king of Jericho, who's a little pipsqueak? She's not dumb. I mean, either she really believes that, the God of Israel represents the right way, and or she realizes that, hey, you know what? This land is going to be conquered and people are going to be slaughtered, and maybe I'll save myself and my family. So she makes this deal with them. What's important, though, also is the fact that she is not an Israelite, but she is going to be saved, as is her family. So you can see already here that the group that's going to be called Israel is made up of a, quote, mixed multitude. Remember, when the Israelites left Egypt, they picked up people along the way. Remember, they picked up some people who wanted to join forces with them. It might have been some Egyptians. It might have been some other people, that they picked up along the way. But it was called a mixed multitude. And when they got to Canaan, so Canaan is really a bunch of city-states ruled by a bunch of little kings. They each have a city that they're ruling over. And these kings aren't necessarily so nice to the inhabitants. They have them working for them and all of that. So it's very possible that a bunch of Canaanites said, you know what? I think I'm going to ally myself with these Israelites, because they have a different way of understanding the value of human beings, not the way our kings are exploiting us. So there are a lot of people who got together. I mean, Israel is not necessarily, Abraham's descendants. It's a bunch of different people who get together and say, these laws are the laws that we want to follow. And this identity is the identity that we want to have, which is why I think when people convert to Judaism, that, you know, you're embraced in the peoplehood, because it's not about your, you know, blood. It's about your value system. It's about your ethics. Sometimes the ethics aren't so great, like when they kill off the Canaanites, but, you know, we're going to put that aside for a moment. You know, the people who want to follow the Torah and follow the covenant with God are those who are embraced as Israelites and later as Jews. Remember, Ruth is also the person who says, I'm going to follow your God. So Rahab does that. And according to the Midrash, Joshua eventually marries Rahab. Isn't that sweet?
Yeah.
Even though she was a prostitute. Oh, well.
Yeah.
And according to the Midrash, the prophets Jeremiah and Huldah were their descendants.
Ah.
Now, who remembers Huldah? Who is Huldah?
She verified the scroll of Deuteronomy.
Exactly.
And in some kings, was it Josiah?
Josiah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
in his
Josiah.
reign.
So
Yeah.
Josiah's people go clean up the temple. They find the scroll of Deuteronomy and they're going, wonder if this is authentic. And they go to Huldah, who has a very short but important role in the book of Deuteronomy. I mean, in the book of Kings. But she verifies the authenticity of the book of Deuteronomy. My Bible professor said, remember Huldah, do not forget her. Okay, so she's a descendant of Rahab and Joshua, according to the Midrash, which is very interesting, because who else is a descendant of two interesting people who you wouldn't think would be the descendant or the ancestors of a very important figure?
King David.
King David, yes. Remember, he is a descendant of Ruth, and Ruth was a Moabite.
Right.
So, and this is the rabbis saying, I mean, well, that's in the Torah or in the Tanakh, but the rabbis here are saying that Huldah and Jeremiah are descended from a prostitute. So obviously, you know, your past is not necessarily your future. And I think that's really beautiful, actually. And by the way, she makes a deal, do not kill me. And they kind of change the deal a little bit, right? You know, you're going to have to put this little red ribbon, what was the song? Tie a yellow ribbon right around the old oak tree. Well, she has to tie a little red ribbon. Not quite the cobble, you know, the Kabbalists, you know, supposedly you put a red string around your wrist and you're going to be okay. But I think that's,
But isn't she identifying her house the way that Israelites identified their house?
Oh, during the Passover.
Through the Passover.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's a nice
Yeah,
parallel.
yeah. Yeah.
I like that.
Isn't she doing that?
Well,
yeah.
Very possibly. And we identify our houses with a mezuzah, right? Okay.
How would anybody know? How would anybody know not to destroy her house unless that ribbon is on it? Just like the angel of death will pass over the houses of the Hebrews.
Good. That was a nice parallel. Intertextuality, that's always important. All right, we're gonna, any other comments before we go on to the next chapter? Okay, let's go on to the next one. And we're gonna go to chapter 3. Here we are. Crossing the Jordan. Okay, it's a short, these are very short chapters. Who would like to read chapter 3?
I can.
Okay, thank you, Sandy.
Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan.
People, hang on. Can you mute yourself if you're going to be talking? Thank you. Go ahead.
Where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. do not go near it.
Okay, so the ark is representing the covenant with God. It is showing that we have a special connection to God, but you have to stay away from it, right? Later on, you'll see that when the ark is being carried by a bunch of people with who's going to become King David, somebody gets too near to it and they get zapped. You're also supposed to stay away from, Mount Sinai and not get too close to that, because that's where God is up there giving the 10 Commandments and the Torah. And a cubit is about the length of from your elbow to the end of your hand. And every time I hear the word cubit, I'm sorry, I think of Bill Cosby and the Noah thing that he did, which was really, really hilarious, but it's politically incorrect to refer to him anymore. Okay. Okay, please go on.
Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of Israel, all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river. Joshua said to the Israelites, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites,
Girgashites,
Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the Ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the waters from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the waters flowing down to the sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground.
Thank you. So this is quite a scene. Once again, we have a splitting of the water. So again, a parallel to Moses, right? And you have this water, standing up, and you have the priests with the Ark of the Covenant going ahead, stepping in while there's still water, and then the water, splits. And the whole of these Israelites, God knows how many people there are at this point, it's a lot of people coming through the water on dry ground. I mean, it's quite an impressive image. They should make a movie out of this. Okay.
The thing about it, Rabbi, that I find a little, well, maybe slightly troubling, is that the first reference of it is to escape, to freedom. And now it's to go and oppress and kill.
That's a very good point.
The miracle may be the same, but it's being used for such different purposes. And I think this may be why we don't include this book in, as part of the books of the Torah. Maybe because this is, then you start having to deal with even more of these difficult issues of being a conqueror as opposed to, a saved people, right?
I mean, it's an excellent point. I don't, if you look at the book of Deuteronomy, they were instructed to do this. It says, kill all these people. Those 7 people, those 7 Canaanite peoples, the Talmud says, this is in contra argument to the one that I mentioned before about right-wing, ultra-Orthodox rabbis saying that the Bible gives us the sanction to kick out the Palestinians. This is the actual opposite of what the Talmud says. The Talmud says, and this is how they get around implementing this any further beyond what's here, those 7 people do not exist any longer. Therefore, the idea of, killing them or ethnically cleansing them is no longer, valid. I don't know why these rabbis who quote this, material don't pay attention to that commentary. But anyway, but you're right. It is a very parallel story with a very, very different message. A very, very good, very, very good comment on that. So apparently during the spring harvest, the melting snows actually flood the riverbed. So this is a time when there is a lot of water in the river. And of course, God does these miracles for people who obey the covenant. And here they are going in. I think we might have time to read a little more, because chapter 4 is sort of part of this story. Let me just try to read. Let's see how far we get. Okay. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, 1 from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. Now, this is something that Moses had commanded that they do when they crossed over. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, 1 from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder. So it's obviously not a little stone.
Big one.
According to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan. Like, how many times do you repeat the same thing? Interesting. Make sure you know that it comes from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, just in case you had any question about where these stones came from. And they are there to this day. Now the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, ready for battle in front of the Israelites, as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant law to come up out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. See, he does exactly as he's told. And the priests came out of the river, carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. By the way, one positive here, Jason, is that when they crossed over out of Egypt, when the waters closed up, it killed all the Egyptian soldiers. And here nobody gets killed, but people be killed afterwards. So on the 10th day of the first month, what's the first month? What's the first month in the Bible? It's Nisan, remember? On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. That sounds a little bit like when Moses said, when your children ask you what happened, right? You'll tell them the story of the Passover.
Mhm.
For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the land of the Lord is powerful. The hand of the Lord is powerful. And so that you might always fear the Lord your God. So what Moses commanded in Deuteronomy, at the end of Deuteronomy, was that stones be emplaced and that the entire Torah be written on it. Not only be written on it, but be written on it in 70 languages. Remember, according to the Midrash, the Torah was handed down in 70 languages so that everybody could understand it. And it was also handed down so that everybody could understand it in their own way. So here we are. We're in the land of Canaan now, about to take over the first city, which is Jericho. And some of you may know the story of Jericho, but we'll be learning about it next time, which I believe is the week after next. Any last comments before we sign off? Yes, Jenny.
There we go. Okay. Sorry. I just had a thought or question. Was there a need? So this is taking a non-literal approach to the Torah. Was there a need for repetition at this point, so that people wouldn't say, oh, this happened to Moses, that was so long ago, or, we don't even know if Moses, really existed as a person. But Joshua is clearly meant to be a human being, that he is the son of, as opposed to having some relationship, divinely to God. And so was this possibly inserted to bring it more forward in time so that it didn't seem like all of this happened so long ago, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't know. It's certainly, hi Dan. It's certainly a possibility. I don't know, because usually the Torah, the Tanakh is fairly succinct in what it describes. There's some times when that's not the case. For example, when Eliezer, Abraham's servant, goes to look for a wife for Isaac, he imagines what he'd like to see in the woman that he's going to select for Isaac. Exactly the same thing happens and is narrated, and then he recalls it to Abraham. So it's a lot of repetition there where, you usually don't expect that much verbiage. So it's probably to emphasize, that they're obeying exactly what God said. They're following exactly what God said. Oh, the other place where there's a huge amount of repetition is the last few parshiot of the book of Exodus, when they're describing the building of the tabernacle and the temple. There's incredible detail about God saying, this is how you're going to build it, and these are the specifications. Then there's the golden calf episode, and then there's God's forgiveness, and then they do exactly what God says. So I think it emphasizes the obedience to God, I think. But I'm sure they're, yes, Dan.
As we were reading this, I was thinking about general phenomenon of writing down oral histories many generations later. And usually there is some truth in the oral history that is written down. In Israel, Egypt, and Riverside, we live in a Mediterranean climate where there are very wet years and very dry years. So here, this year we're in a dry year, and there's not so much water in the Santa Ana River.
Mm-hmm.
This is a season where there should be really a lot of water there because we should be having a lot of rain, but it's relatively dry. So you could think of a river being much easier to cross in a dry year that just happens to be a dry year than in a wet year.
That's a very good point. And also, this is the harvest season when the river does overflow. So you would kind of think, gee, why did God tell them to cross over right now when it's completely full? And it's probably just the same way the plagues in Egypt demonstrated God's power. And according to the commentators, the rabbinical commentators, the reason God hardened Pharaoh's heart was to show more and more how powerful God was, right, against this stubborn Pharaoh. So maybe this was a way to demonstrate, hey, you know what? This is the worst time of year to cross over. And that's precisely when you're going to cross over, right? Because God's going to show you what God can do for you if you're an obedient people. So that's a good point. Well, thank you. You guys have made incredible, I'm not supposed to say you guys anymore. Okay, I'm trying to get out of certain habits. The confirmation class that I had this week was led by the Religious Action Center, and they were trying to show kids, it's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, trying to show them things that you're not supposed to say anymore. And, and you guys is verboten, but I've said it so long.
Why? What's wrong with it?
Because you're not a guy.
I mean, what?
Okay, I'll tell you one other one, but wait a minute. I'm
People
going to say
use dude all
goodbye.
the time
I'm going to
too.
say goodbye, and then I'll say it after I stop recording. Okay, so Shabbat Shalom.